Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to address the assembled devotees on this auspicious occasion of your marathon for Bhadra Purnima. I'd like to begin by offering my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada, Shri Guru Karunamaya, Bandham Tara Padadhwaya, Prema Kalpaturu Paradata, Diksha Mantra Harinama, Yahara Amulya Dhana, Gibo Gabo Tashra Gunagata. I bow down to the lotus feet of my spiritual master, who is a wish-fulfilling tree of divine love for Krishna, the most beneficent benefactor who initiated me into the valuable jewels of both the Gayatri and Mahamantras. How can I sufficiently praise his glories? And then to all of you Vaishnavas, Shakala Vaishnava Pade Mora Namaskara, Iti Kichu Aparada Nahuka Amara, Hoyachan Hoyben Prabhur, Jato Bhakta Vrinda, Bandana Kore Shabara Charanaravinda. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of all Vaishnavas, praying I will not commit offenses in my attempts to please them. To all Vaishnavas who have ever been, and to all Vaishnavas who will ever be, I offer my obeisances to their lotus feet. That's a prayer by the devotee poet Devaki Nandana Das, some hundreds of years ago. I also feel it's my duty and my pleasure to also pay my respects to my dear godbrother, mentor, and friend, Sriman Vaisheshika Prabhu, because he stands tall above me in both character and accomplishments. Therefore, I invoke the following for everyone's consideration. It's from Srimad Bhagavatam 3:32-42, from Prabhupada's purport there, and I quote, "If a godbrother is more enlightened and more advanced in Krishna consciousness, one should accept him as almost equal to the spiritual master. And one should be happy to see such godbrothers advance in Krishna consciousness." So with that statement, I'm authorized to say the following prayer. Nama Praharsha Shilaya Prabhupada Nushu Rine Anindita Hriday Tasmai Shastra Bhajana Kodine. Obeisances to him, Prabhupada's enthusiastic follower, whose heart is free of the propensity to criticize others, who fans the spark of pure devotional service in everyone he meets, and who inspires them to distribute the bhakti scriptures. Vaisheshika Prabhu Ki. So, for the next few days, devotees around the world will be striving to reach a goal of distributing 10,000 sets of Srimad Bhagavatam or more before or on the auspicious full moon day of the month of Bhadra. What is the significance of Bhadra Purnima? In the Bhagavata Mahatmya section of the Padma Purana, Uttarakanda, it's stated that on Bhadra Purnima, Sri Shukadev Goswami completed his narration of Srimad Bhagavatam. That's from Shastra. And all the book distributors are very excited now because they're aware how in Srimad Bhagavatam 12:13, you all know this verse, it's stated that by giving a Srimad Bhagavatam on Bhadra Purnima, Sayati Paramam Gatim. Sayati Paramam Gatim, that one will attain the supreme transcendental destination. And to whom are we giving or selling these sets to? Well, actually Bhagavad Gita recommends that we use some discrimination in whom we give charity to. There's that famous verse from Bhagavad Gita, Tatavyam iti yad dhanam diyate nupakarine deshakale cha patre cha tadanam satvikam shmitam. Charity given out of duty, without expectation of return, at the proper time and place, and to a worthy person, is considered to be in the mode of goodness. We're supposed to give charity to people of worthy of that charity. And a great Vaishnava saint who lived some hundreds of years ago, his name was Sri Vamshidhara Sharma. He wrote, Suvritaya Grihashtaya Krishna Bhakta Ya Santatam Sarva Shastra Vide Veda Japane Ni Rata Yacha Vipraya Deyam Etatu Srimad Bhagavatam Muniye. Quote, very interesting verse. This Srimad Bhagavatam should only be gifted to a well-behaved grihastra who is a constant devotee of Krishna. Such a grihastra should know all the Shastras and should be engaged in teaching the Vedas. It's a strong injunction. The Bhagavatam should only be gifted to a well-behaved grihastra who's a devotee of Krishna, who knows all the Shastras, and he's a teacher of the Vedas. So what's going on here? This Bhadra Purnima marathon. Well, we are all Gaura Bhaktas. We're devotees of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. He's the Yuga avatar. Prabhupada said when many instructions are given, the last instruction is the most relevant. So many avatars have come with giving their instructions according to time, place, and circumstance, as have great acharyas. But Caitanya Mahaprabhu, he's a special avatar. And he introduced a different conception about giving charity. He's the most merciful incarnation. He broke open the storehouse of mercy for everyone. Patra patra vichara nahi, nahi shta nashtana. Ye yanha paya tanha kari premadana. He said, in distributing love of Godhead, or it is said, in distributing love of Godhead, Caitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates did not consider who was a fit candidate and who was not, nor where such distribution should or should not take place. They made no conditions. Wherever they got the opportunity, the members of the Panchatattva distributed love of Godhead. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So this is how we see the distribution of charity. So this Bhadra Purnima marathon, it perfectly conforms to the Yuga avatars, to Caitanya Mahaprabhu's instructions, and as they've come down to us, to the succession, especially from Srila Prabhupada, who very much encouraged us in book distribution. The importance of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the book we're distributing this month, in our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, it cannot be underestimated, nor can it be sufficiently glorified. Srimad Bhagavatam 1:340 says, Puranam Brahma Samhitam. This scripture named Srimad Bhagavatam is the literary incarnation of God. There's many kinds of incarnations, but Puranam Brahma Samhitam. This is the literary incarnation of God. Bhagavatam's an incarnation of Krishna. And what are the activities of an incarnation? That we know, we all know from Bhagavad Gita. What are the activities of an incarnation? Paritranaya sadhanam, vinashaya duskritam, dharma samstapanarthaya, sambhavami yuge yuge. 4:8. In order to deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to reestablish the principles of religion, Krishna says, I advent myself millennium after millennium. So there's a designation of an incarnation. To be respected or honored, worshipped as an incarnation, therefore one must deliver the pious, he must kill miscreants, and he must establish dharma. So the Bhagavatam identifies itself as an incarnation. So does the Bhagavatam meet that criteria? Yes, it does. Let's first consider Paritranaya Sadhanam. Does the Bhagavatam deliver people? Yes, it does it by sound vibration. Vedanta Sutra says, Om Anavriti Shabdat. By sound, one is liberated. By sound, one is conditioned, and by sound, one is liberated. So people are getting delivered by this incarnation by Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam. Hearing, chanting the Bhagavatam brings Krishna Smarana. And we all know how the Bhagavatam has delivered us. It's our savior. Shukadeva Goswami writes as such, Madeka Bharu Matsangam Madguru Man Mahadhana Man Nishtaraka Madbhakya Madananta Namoshtute. Krishna Lila Stava. Devotee, you probably all know this verse because it's so relevant to Bhagavatam, and we're all distributing the Bhagavatam during this month. He writes, my only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, Nishtaraka, he says, my savior, Nishtaraka, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you, Srimad Bhagavatam. I know, at least myself, this is true. I was thinking, when Vaisheshika Prabhu asked me to speak on this subject matter, I was remembering the first day I met devotees, way back 51 years ago, on the campus lawn at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I met 4 sannyasis, Vishnujan Maharaj, Brahmananda, Gagamuni, and Subal Maharaj. That's what it took to make me a devotee. But I noticed when I first walked up, this big, tall, effulgent personality, Vishnujan Maharaj, he was speaking to the students, and he was holding this old brick-colored book in his hand. And later when I asked him about that book, I said, what is it? And he said, this is the Srimad Bhagavatam, the king of all scriptures. I never heard of a king in relationship to scriptures. You know, I've heard of kings, emperors who fought wars, but I never heard king of the scriptures. But he said those words with so much love, it just resonated in my heart. So those sannyasis stayed with me for 3 days. And the day after I met them, that book was sitting on a table. And I asked Vishnujan Maharaj if I could look at it. So I looked inside and I said, I want this book. I said, where can I buy it? He said, it's not available. But inside I found there was a little message, in the second page. It said, interested readers may inquire from, quote, the League of Devotees, Vrindavan, UP, India. So I took that address down. There was no street address, no box office number, no post number, zip code, nothing. I thought, why not try? So I put $20 in an envelope with my address, a little note asking for the book, and I wrote on the envelope, League of Devotees, Vrindavan, UP, India. Send it airmail. 3 months later, I received a burlap bag wrapped parcel that had been sent by sea mail, by ship from India. And when I opened it up, there it was, the same first canto Srimad Bhagavatam brick color, the original Bhagavatams that Vishnujan Maharaj had carried. I read it cover to cover so many times, and that's what convinced me to become a devotee. So yes, the Bhagavatam is Paritranaya Sadhanam, delivering us. To be an incarnation, the Bhagavatam has to kill demons. So certainly the sound vibration of the Bhagavatam is purifying the demoniac propensities in our heart. Shrinvatam sva kata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyantasto yabadrani vidunoti shritam satam. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma supersoul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Number 3, does this incarnation establish Dharma? It sure does, because the Bhagavatam propounds the highest Dharma. Savaipum Shampada Dharmo Yato Bhakti Radoksaje Ahayatikiyapatiyata Yayatma Suprasidati. The supreme occupation Dharma for all humanity is that by which men can attain to the loving service of the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. So by fulfilling all these requirements, Srimad Bhagavatam has become the Grantaraj, king of all scriptures. Most important scripture. Again, it identifies itself. It has the right to do that in the Bhagavatam. Nimna ganam yata ganga, devanam achuto yata, vaishnavanam yata sambhu, purananam idam tata. Purananam idam tata. Just as the Ganga is the greatest of all rivers, Lord Achyuta, supreme amongst deities, and Lord Sambhu, Shiva, the greatest of Vaishnavas. So Srimad Bhagavatam is the greatest of all Puranas. So we're all aware of that special line in Srimad Bhagavatam. What is the verse? 1.5.11? Adva Vishargo Janatka Viplavo, that this Bhagavatam is meant to bring about a revolution in the impious lives of the world's misdirected civilization. There's that word revolution. It really stirs up the Sankirtan devotees. Revolution. So one could say that this spiritual revolution to purify the world and awaken prema, or love of God, as given by Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, began in earnest with the appearance of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, who envisioned a worldwide society of devotees who would take Krishna consciousness to every town and village of the world. And part of his scheme was to have the 6 Goswamis write books on the science of Krishna consciousness. A practice Prabhupada said his followers have continued down to the present day. Books are an integral part of Vedic culture, and so much so in our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. Books were very much part of the 6 Goswamis' lives, the first disciples of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And that was especially true, in one sense, of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. For his worshipable deity was Srimad Bhagavatam. He spent a total of 8 months in the service of Lord Chaitanya in Jagannath Puri, after which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sent him to Vrindavan to study the Bhagavatam under the guidance of Sanatan Goswami and Srila Rupa Goswami. And after some time, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami became so expert in reciting Bhagavatam, it said that he could recite each and every verse, 18,000 verses, in 3 melodious tunes. So again, his worshipable deity was the Bhagavatam. Whereas the other 5 Goswamis, they each had their worshipable deities in the forms of Govindaji, Damodar, Madan Mohan, Radharaman, and Giriraj Govardhan. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami had Srimad Bhagavatam as his Ishtadeva. He saw the Bhagavatam as Krishna himself, and that's possible. Again, Srila Sanatana Goswami writes, Paramananda Pataya Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kalidvanto Ditya Sri Krishna Pari Vartita. I bow down to you, the Bhagavatam, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Krishna Parivartita. Krishna Parivartita. You are Krishna himself. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami Srimad Bhagavatam is still being worshipped here in Vrindavan at a place called Gadadhar Bhattapith in Vrindavan. He was a disciple of Gadadhar Pandit. So again, just by reading or hearing the Bhagavatam, one can achieve perfection. And Krishna wants us to hear the Bhagavatam. He strongly wants us to spend time hearing the Bhagavatam so we become inspired to give the Bhagavatam to others. Hear the Bhagavatam. Once in Vrindavan, there was a blind old woman who made her living by selling wheat flour. She would grind grains day and night in an area called Jaru Mandala here in Vrindavan. It's not far from where I live here, which was also a place that devotees would gather to regularly discuss, hear and chant about Krishna consciousness. Unfortunately, her grinding became a significant distraction for the devotees, who could hear the noise from her mill more easily than they could hear the narrations of Radha and Krishna's pastimes. So repeated attempts were made to convince this woman to stop her grinding when devotees were in the area, hearing Bhagavatam, etc. Or maybe to ask her to move to another location, but she was too old to go anywhere else, she said. So finally the local pandas and the resident devotees became so upset that they decided to choose another site to congregate, somewhere where they could hear and be heard without disturbance. However, the Vaishnav lore, the Bhajabasi say, Krishna didn't want his devotees to abandon that particular place because it was a pastime place. So he decided to intervene on their behalf. And he appeared before that blind woman and empowered her to see him. To stop the racket she was causing, the Lord placed his foot on the grinding stone, her grinding stone, and said, don't you know that you're disturbing my devotees by creating this noise? You must stop this at once. So, of course, the old lady was in ecstasy seeing Krishna, and she bowed repeatedly to him, and then finally replied, "O Lord, whatever is your order, I will certainly follow. But I must ask you, how will I live if I leave and try to set up somewhere else? My tiny income comes from selling wheat flour. If I stop grinding, my income will stop. Then I won't be able to afford to eat, not to mention buy the flowers and fruit that I offer you in my meager service." So it's said that taking compassion on his devotee, Krishna pressed his foot firmly into the grinding stone, leaving a clear impression of his footprint. And the old woman gazed at that footprint in amazement. Pointing to his footprint, Krishna then said, "News that my footprint is impressed on your grinding stone will spread throughout Braja. Locals and pilgrims alike will come to visit it and offer their respects. Worship this footprint with tulsi leaves and flowers. As its custodian, you can live from the coins that people place on it. Have faith. I will ensure that your income is sufficient for your maintenance." So then Krishna disappeared. The old woman, it said, she stopped grinding grains and served the Lord's footprint instead. And just as Krishna promised, she was able to subsist comfortably on the donations that pilgrims would leave. And from that time on, the pilgrims were not only free to hear Krishna's pastimes at Jaramandala without disturbance, but also to meditate upon Krishna's lotus feet as they listened. And our acharyas have given us this story because they say it's evidence of Krishna's deep concern that devotees always have the opportunity to hear about him. He is willing to intervene personally when there is some interruption to this activity of Shravanam Kirtanam, hearing and chanting, which brings remembrance of him, Krishna Smaranam, hearing the Shastras. So I thought that's a nice story to show how Krishna wants us to hear And he intervened in this particular pastime so that the devotees could be peaceful and not hear the grinding mill and just hear Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam. So it's so beneficial to hear. So we don't want to be misers. We want to just keep it for ourselves. We want to give it to others. Just like in the Christmas marathon, I often tell the devotees, as Jesus said, it's better to give than it is to receive. And really, this is the real pleasure that we experience in Krishna consciousness. Not just the pleasure of becoming relieved from sinful activities or sinful reactions, or even just chanting Hare Krishna ourselves, but that when you give the holy name to someone else, the holy name blesses the giver to experience the highest taste of Krishna consciousness, giving, like God does. If it's good enough for God, it's good enough for us. So Caitanya Mahaprabhu came to give the Sankirtan movement. He enjoyed it, and the Acharyas enjoyed it. So that's where our future lies. Our happiness lies in giving Krishna consciousness. So what will be the result of giving a Bhagavatam? Again, Sayati Paramam Gatim. If you give a Bhagavatam on the full moon in this month of Bhadra, you'll attain the supreme transcendental destination. Wow, one Bhagavatam to one person. But how does that work? Is it that by one simple act of distributing one single Bhagavatam to one single person, we qualify ourselves to go back home, back to Godhead? Well, yes and no. It's part of a greater theme. That by dedicating our entire lives to serving Srila Prabhupada's desire to enlighten the world by book distribution, we're entitled to receive such mercy. Param gopyam api shnigde, shishe vacham iti shruti, chachchuruyatam mahabhagya, goloka mai madhuna. One of my favorite verses. The Vedas say that to a loyal disciple, one may speak the confidential secret. Therefore, O most fortunate one, now please hear the glories of Goloka. Remaining loyal to our spiritual master, serving his mission selflessly without desiring anything in return, spiritual master gives the most valuable thing. He gives the confidential secret. He gives deeper understanding of Krishna consciousness. That's from Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Part 2, Chapter 1, Text 6. So while it's true that Krishna's mercy is such that by one deed done in devotional service, one can achieve perfection, the general rule is that by a lifetime of seva, one achieves perfection. It's difficult, actually. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1:135, Sada Nagayar Anash Nagayar, Alabhu Su Chiradapi, Harina Chas Videyeti, Vidvasa Syat Sudurlabha. Rupa Goswami says, devotional perfection is very difficult to attain for two reasons. First, unless one is attached to Krishna, he cannot attain devotional perfection, even if he renders devotional service for a long time. Secondly, Krishna does not easily deliver perfection in devotional service. So sometimes devotees do get special mercy, just like to be awarded a university degree, one patiently and diligently takes courses for 4 years, but sometimes the university awards a person proficient in some knowledge who did not attend the school an honorary degree. So yes, one book, one person, one time, Goloka. But generally we go through the whole process of sadhana bhakti, raganuga bhakti, prema bhakti. It's okay. Maybe it's even more relishable to stay behind and keep distributing Prabhupada's books until all the 14 worlds are delivered. Baladev Bhushan writes that the pastimes of Lord Caitanya are especially relishable in the material world because of the dark background, because the dark background of material existence, which doesn't exist in the spiritual world. in the sense he gives the example like you take a diamond and you put it on a black piece of velvet, then you can really appreciate it. So the transcendentally effulgent pastimes of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees in distributing the Sankirtan movement, they're more appreciable in the material world because of the background of the darkness of ignorance. Even more appreciable, he says, than in the spiritual world. So thus one could think that a lifetime of distributing or organizing book distribution is an ideal life. Just like our Vaisheshika Prabhu. He's distributed books his whole life. He organizes book distribution on a mass level. And perhaps most importantly, most significantly, he has ensured in the service of his spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, the perpetual distribution of books through the ages by his magnum opus. Those of you who are university students, magnum opus, that's the best achievement one makes in one's life. By his magnum opus, which is our family business, that book, Our Family Business. He's ensured that devotees can remain inspired in book distribution for the full gamut of 10,000 years of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. I've read that book 3 times. Every book distributor should know that book like the back of his hand, as we say in English. Srila Prabhupada said of his books that we should know them like a lawyer knows the law books. And therefore we should never forget that ISKCON is first and foremost a missionary movement. And book distribution is a principal anga or arm of that missionary spirit. It should never go out of style. Well, that was something we did in the 70s and the 80s. No. There's certain things that will never go out of style, like prasadam. I'm sure that's guaranteed. Bhagavatam, reading, visiting the deities in the temple. But this process of giving Krishna consciousness, especially through book distribution, it should never go out of style. Rather, it should continue and grow on and on and on and on. In the beginning of our movement, and through the formative years of our movement, the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, book distribution was the service that united our ever-growing and expanding movement. It was the glue that held everything together, and it kept devotees enthusiastic, which is a key element in devotional service. But of course, in course of time, and naturally so, our movement has become diversified, and that's also required. Temples, schools, farms, restaurants. And so the motto now is more unity and diversity, thus fulfilling Prabhupada's desire for a worldwide movement, encompassing all aspects of society and all types of people. However, unity and singularity is also a valid motto. And that motto is, without a doubt, the motto of ISKCON Silicon Valley, where book distribution is the singular or principal activities of devotees who live diverse ways of life. And therefore you find an enduring enthusiasm in the temple and the congregation of ISV. Enthusiasm. You see that wherever you go in the world where books are being distributed and Sankirtan's going on. There's this mystical enthusiasm. As Yamuna Devi, my god sister, said, so many magic moments. Enthusiasm is so important to maintain. In a letter, the 31st of December 1972, in Bombay, Prabhupada wrote in a letter, quote, I'm especially glad to note that everyone is feeling so much enthusiasm to work very hard in this preaching mission. That enthusiasm must be maintained under all circumstances. That is our price for entering Krishna's kingdom. And Maya is always trying to take away our enthusiasm to serve Krishna, because without enthusiasm, everything else is finished. Any Sankirtan devotee, part-time or full-time or even just a couple of times, will know how much enthusiasm is generated from book distribution. Why? Because Krishna reciprocates very quickly. If we want mercy, we go out on the street, we get on the phone. Now we're calling people on the phone because of COVID-19. Any novel way we can come up, we're sharing our good fortune with others. We're always in life with this because Krishna is pleased. So why is book distribution so important, especially as regarding the Bhadra Purnima marathon? Because what are we giving people? Raja Vidya, the king of all education, transcendental knowledge. But more specifically, we're giving them the Grantharaj, the king of all scriptures, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Such an important book. In the Caitanya Mata Manjusha by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, very important verse, which mentions the Bhagavatam. Aradyo Bhagavan Brajesa Tanyanyas Tadhama Vrindavanam Ramya Kaschid Upashana Braja Vadhu Vargena Val Kalpita Srimad Bhagavatam Pram Nam Amalam Prema Pum Arto Mahan Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhur Matam Idam Chattadara Napara. I'm just learning that verse, so excuse me, it didn't flow so well. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, the son of Nanda Maharaj, is worshipped along with his transcendental abode of Vrindavan. The most pleasing form of worship for the Lord is that which was performed by the gopis of Vrindavan. Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless authority on everything, and pure love of Godhead is the ultimate goal of life for all men. These statements, for which we have the highest regard, are the opinion of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. However, the crowning glory of giving people Srimad Bhagavatam, especially in the form of sets, are the purports of Srimad Bhagavatam by Srila Prabhupada, the famous Bhaktivedanta purports. It's really Prabhupada's purports that reveal the glories of the Srimad Bhagavatam, or Krishna consciousness to the people. The analogy is given. The analogy given is fruit in a tree. When the parrot nibbles the fruit, by contact with the parrot's saliva, the fruit is said to become sweeter. So that immortal analogy is enshrined in Srimad Bhagavatam 1:1-3. Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam shuka mukhad amrita dhrava samyutam pibata bhagavatam rasam alayam mahoraho rasika bhuvi bhavuka. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Shukadev Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. So what's really happening when we give Srimad Bhagavatam to people is that we're giving them Srila Prabhupada. 10:48-31. Nayam mayani tirtani nadeva mrichchila maya te punat yuru kalena darshan adheva shadava. Krishna said to Akura, water alone does not make a sacred place, nor is it earth or clay that encompasses the deity. The waters of the Ganges, visits to holy places, and the worship of Shalagram Shila purify one only after a long time. But sadhus like you purify one instantly by their very sight. So that verse is important because when we're giving people the Bhagavatam, we're giving them Prabhupada's purports, they're getting Prabhupada's association. So by giving Bhagavatam, we're doing the highest welfare work. It's good for them and it's good for us. In his purports to Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati writes, and I quote, in the teachings of Sriman Mahaprabhu, there are only two principal instructions: display a taste for chanting the holy names and display compassion for the fallen souls. That might make a nice mission statement for ISKCON. In the teachings of Mahaprabhu, there are only two principal instructions: develop a taste for chanting the holy names, and display compassion for fallen souls. So how powerful is Srila Prabhupada's association, either in Vani or Vapu? Well, I'd just like to conclude. I think I've gone over my time, but just with a short story. One more personal story, because it does seem to enliven the devotees the most. How Prabhupada's association can enliven one to read his books. Many, many years ago, in the early 1970s, I was doing Sankirtan in an island called Corsica in the Mediterranean Sea with my Sankirtan party. And one Saturday we did a program in a yoga studio. And to that program came about 15 or 20 people. And there was one gentleman in a uniform. He turned out to be an admiral in the French Navy. He was just going home from his work, and he happened to see our kirtan, and something pulled him in. And he sat down, he listened to the lecture, he kind of chanted, he took a little prasadam. And at the end of that program, before everyone had left, I received a call from the temple in Paris. And they told us that Prabhupada he was in Europe and he was supposed to go to one temple, but the plan changed, and he had arrived in Paris, France. And the temple president said, "Get back here as fast as you can. Prabhupada's here for 4 days." So I made a little announcement to the people. I'm going back to Paris to see my spiritual master, who's written the purports in this Bhagavad Gita, which I'd spoken from that evening. So the admiral came up to me before he left, and he said, "Young man," I was 23. He was in his 60s. "Can I come with you to see your spiritual master?" I said, "What?" He said, "I'd like me and my family to come with you to see your spiritual master. I'm so touched by what he said. And I've taken a week leave from the Navy." I said, "Okay." To make a long story short, we took a boat across the river, across the ocean to Marseille, and we drove up 12 hours to Paris. And the admiral and his family were in a car behind us. We arrived at the temple. I arranged an accommodation for the admiral and his family. And then I told the temple president, I said, "I have a special guest to see Srila Prabhupada." He said, "Only great authors or politicians, we're making." I said, "I've got an admiral in the French Navy." I said, "Okay." So that I brought the admiral in. I was very proud. "Prabhupada, I've brought you one admiral." So they spoke for some time. And again, I'll shorten it, but at the end, the admiral said to Srila Prabhupada, "I'm so impressed by the way you speak," he said. What chapter of this book, Bhagavad Gita, is the most important and I should read the most? What's the most important chapter to focus on? Prabhupada immediately said, the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So the admiral said, "I'll read that chapter regularly." Prabhupada blessed him, and then he left. I wish I had more time, but years later, maybe 5 years later, 6 years, 7 years later, I can't remember, I was doing Sankirtan in Dhoti and Kurta, tilak, shaved head, big garland. That's how I used to do it on the street. On the Champs-Élysées, most important street in France, near the Arc de Triomphe, and there was this big celebration. The military was having a big army, the Navy, the Air Force, they're all there, and all kinds of barricades and police. And I was trying to distribute Bhagavad Gitas to the people there, and the police kept pushing me back, screaming at me, yelling at me, fining me. I kept trying to get in, but I was so obvious. Lo and behold, I saw from a distance, maybe 30 meters away, there was this, people were sitting on these benches, going up like this. I saw the admiral, and I yelled out, "Admiral, Admiral, Admiral," so loud that everybody looked at me. The admiral saw me, and he had his security with him, of course, and he said, he came down from the benches. He came down and he walked over to me. Everyone was looking like, what's happening? This man in a uniform, all kinds of decorations. He came over and he asked him, he said, He said, Indradyumna. He remembered my name, Indradyumna Das. How are you? I said, Admiral, I'm doing fine. He said, I'm also doing fine. I said, you remember you had that meeting with my guru? He said, how could I forget? It was the most significant moment in my life. I said, whoa, that's so wonderful to hear that. He said, I think of your guru every day. And I said, I remember Prabhupada told you to read the Bhagavad Gita, 9th chapter as often as possible. He said, I read it every day. He said, in fact, I've memorized most of the verses. I read it every day. It guides me through my life. Wow. And then he got a call from the official. Oh, come on, we have to come back. So he was about to leave, and I grabbed him. I said, I said, wait. I said, let's keep in touch. He said, yes, let's keep in touch. So we exchanged information. Then just before he left, he said, so how's your guru doing? I said, Admiral, I didn't tell you, but since you met Srila Prabhupada, he departed this world. He was elderly and he was in his 80s. He went back to the spiritual world. When I said that, he got shocked and tears came from his eyes. Admiral started crying. He said, he's gone? He's gone, but he's my guide. He's my guide. He's my guide. And the announcement came, and he just kind of turned around like this without saying anything, and he walked very slowly away. So, sadhu sangha, sarva shastakoi, lavamatra sadhu sangha, sarva siddhikoi. Prabhupada is available, his association, in Vapu form or Vani form. That Admiral kept his association with Srila Prabhupada by reading, not only by memory, but by reading Bhagavad Gita. And he considered Prabhupada his guide. So in the same way, when we're distributing these Bhagavatams, the purports, Prabhupada said, are his ecstasies. And if we want to know him, we read those purports. So as we've been touched by Prabhupada's mercy, through his books, through his instructions, we should give that mercy out to others. And although most devotees cannot distribute books full-time or even part-time these days, this Bhadra Purnima marathon gives us the opportunity to do some book distribution or to give donations for the sets. Others can give them to their friends or their well-wishers or workers. Everyone can participate in this way and give Bhagavatam and give Prabhupada to the whole world. So I've gone way over my time, so sorry. But I'm an old book distributor myself. I distributed books for 11 years, almost every day, even on Janmashtami, Radhastami, the Shringa days of his. It's addictive. And now I have so many other responsibilities. But I always think if the world fell apart and nothing else was there, I'd go back to France. I still got my book bag hanging in one of my disciples' homes. I just go back, take that book bag off the shelf there, put some books in it. I just go back into the villages and walk door to door, selling Bhagavad Gitas and Srimad Bhagavatams to people. It's such a wonderful nectarian service. So I very much appreciate this opportunity to encourage those of you who are actually out there. All glories to your service. And I'll conclude with a beautiful verse by Sri Narhari Chakravarti, his opening prayer and his Bhakti Ratnakara, or the jewel-filled ocean of devotional service. Very quickly, he says to all of us, he's actually praying to Lord Caitanya, O my Lord Gaurahari, you are the abode of auspiciousness, beautified by the kirtan of Lord Krishna. You are the ocean of elegance, the bestower of a constant flow of devotion, and a mountain of love that is as bright as gold. Your beautiful features give soothing relief to the eyes of every living being, and you are mankind's salvation from all kinds of misfortune. You are the life of all devotees. Dear Mahaprabhu, please be merciful to me. Vaisheshika Prabhu, thank you so much. All the devotees who are organizing this marathon around the world, I take the dust of your feet upon my head. All glories to all the Sankirtan devotees. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Shri Prabhupada Ki Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Gopremanandi Hari Holy Bol. She from Sri Vrindavan Dham here in India. Jai Jai Sisi Radhe Shyam. Now get out there and distribute those books, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. We've got a few more days left. Hari Bol. Thank you.